Welcome everyone to a video about an aspect of shamanic astrology and astrology in general called Chiron, the centaur shaman healer, and what it means in shamanic astrology. This is a really important piece, not only of shamanic astrology, but for many out there that practice astrology in Western astrology in particular, and what this means on a person's astrology chart or natal chart, and what it means for us on a more deeply personal level for as we journey through our lives. I wanted to share about Chiron. This is a great time to share about it in my own life. I'm experiencing what is known as a Chiron return. So I've been fascinated with what Chiron means in a deeper level than I have before in the past, exploring what it means in the various readings that I've done for clients. And I've got some examples towards the end of this video of what how Chiron has shown up in a couple of notable people's lives. And of course, also my own, to give you kind of a highlight of what this all connects to for ourselves and this life that we're living, this lifetime. So what is Chiron and what does it mean? I'm going to talk about the mythology a little bit, where it is located in the sky, and but most of the video will be discussing how it shows up in today's world for our time, the age in which we're living, how it connects us to our certain initiations that we have in our lives at certain times that help us grow as human beings, help us evolve into more of our authentic expression of who we are, what our soul is desiring in this lifetime. So let's dive into it. Okay, so Chiron is currently in the sign of Aries. This takes it somewhat close to the orbit of Uranus right now. In fact, it is continuing to make progress, although be it's very, very slow progress, as its orbit is about right now about the same speed, if you will, or going through around the sun around the same time as Uranus. But many years from now, that'll quicken up and will end up moving a bit faster than the planet Uranus. So it spends nearly half of its average 50-year orbit in 3 signs: Pisces, Aries, and Taurus. So we've gone through Chiron and Pisces, the sign of Pisces, and now Chiron is in the sign of Aries, and then in 2020, beginning in 2026, it'll transition into the sign of Taurus. When it egresses into a new sign, it tends to spend about part of the year in one sign and the other part in another sign. This happens to a lot of the outer planets, the planets that typically the Jupiter and beyond. And then before Chiron was moving into Aries, it was in the sign of Pisces. This was 2010 through 2019. And in 2019, it spent about 2.5 months, only 2.5 months inside of Pisces, and about 9.5. Or actually, that should be about 3.5 months there. 3.5 months in Pisces and 9.5 months in Aries. And now, so it's about roughly 7 to 8 years in both Pisces and Aries, and kind of a little bit slightly less in the sign of Taurus. So it starts to kind of pick up a little bit of speed when it gets to the Taurus, but it's really not that different in how far it's going there. But you can see here that this diagram of the white circle, that's Chiron, also labeled astronomically as 2060 Chiron. And then the green orbit is Uranus. Here is Saturn, the yellow orbit, and then Jupiter in the inner part. And of course, all the little inner planets, including Earth, are inside Jupiter's orbit there. So where is Chiron in the sky? If we were to look for it, this is where it would be. Even though it's in the sign of Aries, it is not in the constellation of what astronomers still call Aries out there in the night sky, in the constellation of the fish. And you can see right here towards the middle of the screen, Chiron is this month in August, about 12 to 13 degrees of the sign Aries. And it's not far from what we call the vernal equinox point or March equinox point here in the, which begins 0 Aries, or, when the Earth is one of the equinox points. That means that the Earth is half in light and half in shadow, equal day, equal night, not perfectly equal. It depends on where you are on the globe and the topography and the mountains and the latitude. All of that matters to see if you're getting precisely the same amount. Because of atmospheric conditions and all of that, it's never necessarily exactly equal day, 12 hours a day, 12 hours a night. There's the ecliptic, and you can see Chiron right now is sitting near the ecliptic, but Chiron has a very elliptical orbit, so it isn't always this close to the ecliptic. Right now, at least at this time in August of 2021, the constellation of the fish is visible in the very, very late evening and early morning skies. This will become more apparent and when we get into the fall or the autumn here in the Northern Hemisphere, and in the springtime in the Southern Hemisphere, where that constellation tends to be much more visible in the early to mid-evening skies. So what is Chiron in mythology? Well, Chiron is the immortal centaur shaman who's expert in various areas of knowledge and included, but not limited to, medicine, music, astrology, herbs, hunting, and prophecy. He was a powerful teacher and a healer in the ancient world, and this carried over into his renown as a teacher and healer, carried over to many notable students, including Achilles, Asclepius, Castor and Pollux, Dionysus, Heracles, Odysseus, Jason the Argonauts, and Perseus. And he was taught and raised by Artemis and Apollo, according to legend. Now, one of the notable students, Asclepius, was basically known as the god of healing, and he was taught directly by Chiron, the centaur, and the one who had the rod and the symbol with the snake on the rod, which is a symbol that essentially a rough symbol that the current modern medicine uses today to represent medicine, to represent the field of healing in sort of the scientific context. So they draw back all the way to many thousands of years ago, over 2,000 years ago, to draw upon that healing symbolism. And it's interesting that a quote science uses a lot of symbolism. Even Hippocrates, which was also someone that studied under I think in one of the temples of Chiron in ancient Greece, also brought that same healing renown to the ancient world, and the Hippocratic Oath, which was modified for modern medicine today. So the main myth of Chiron that we know, at least especially when it comes to the psychological expression of it within ourselves, involves a poisonous wound that Chiron took on, and because he's immortal, it didn't kill him, but he was unable to fully heal. And then eventually it got to a point where Chiron desired to sacrifice himself on the mountain to replace Prometheus. Now there's various versions of the story, so all depends on what you read. But there's one version of this that takes place in the story of Ovid, that involves Chiron becoming the constellation Centaurus, which is what Zeus helped move him into. So the primary lesson of Chiron, and for ourselves, regardless of what necessarily astrology you subscribe to or not, is to heal thyself and develop their own medicine from the wound or fracture point. So it depends on Chiron's location, what sign it was in, and the house position, astrologically speaking, that it was in to help us determine what the major fracture or wound is on a soul level. So in shamanic astrology, we utilize that knowledge to help us understand what Chiron brings to a person's life. Okay, so here we go. More about this now. Dana Giamario, where shamanic astrology originated from, brought Chiron into the fold of the school, shamanic astrology paradigm, and then the mystery school itself, back in I believe it was in the early 2000s when this was brought forth, late 90s, early 2000s. But he outlined 6 major points, sort of the usual suspects when it comes to our fractures on a deep psychic level: betrayal, abandonment, isolation, lack of self-love, guilt and shame. Number 5 would be victimization. And lastly, perfection or the inner critic. Now, sometimes these things have overlap with other parts of who we are on the chart. Like, for example, Saturn can sometimes also create circumstances in our lives that have to do with guilt and shame and perfectionism, including the inner critic. So it all, again, there's actually a interesting relationship between Saturn and Chiron, which could be for a video later on. But for right now, we all experience one core fracture point, if not more. Sometimes it's not just one, but others. And that when we are born is best described as being separated from unity. So that's all we all have that, or from our true divine nature. And this can be feel as something as piercing you in the heart. And this is something Daniel writes about in his book, The Shamanic Astrology Handbook. So Chiron cycles, or either the placement of the cycles on it, really help us digest, really help us understand our wounds, our fracture point, and to work with them, not to erase them or to cover them up, but to really work with them on a healthy level. All right, so I'm going to get into a little bit about Chiron and Aries, because this is the current time in which we're living in right now, through just about 2026 to 2027, and that's when it starts to transition into the sign of Taurus. So one of the amazing pieces of work that one can get into, not only with the fractures of the masculine, or what Mars brings in astrology as well, but also Chiron and its and current state with Aries. In this book, A Terrible Love of War, James Hillman writes about the tragedy and scope of the true damage of war and its aftermath, especially in the Western world, but really all around the globe. A lot of examples are given about this romanticism and this attachment to war, as war has been, you might say, normalized in the last few thousand years here in humanity. Granted, we have a greater awareness and consciousness of human life at this time, from a different perspective, but there's still this great need to have, professional armies and soldiers, and the debate that continues to be talked about throughout the decades, at least here in the United States where I reside, is like soldiers coming back from war, the traumas that are experienced, the terrible loss of life, and what they experience coming back and trying to adjust to a non-war situation. And astrologically, this connects us to the sign of Aries and the shadow of Aries, the sort of the, one could even say the violation of Aries itself as a sign, and of the masculine. Just as if we're the masculine is, oh, we have to go on our mission and serve our country, but we have to take up arms in order to do that. Granted, that's just sort of a little episode of one version of how the masculine has been, sort of taken into a sort of a one-dimensional, two-dimensional image. And it's a kind of a heartbreaking book, but it has a lot of truth in there. So what Chiron, why I bring this up is because Chiron in Aries, and also part of what Chiron represents is being able to grieve for our losses, being able to truly and deeply grieve for what we've lost within ourselves. It could even be a loss of other people that we loved or were connected to. But this is a really important transition, and I feel like at this time in humanity, certainly in the United States, but in humanity in general, because Chiron and Aries is for the whole world, is to create a way for grieving to be done in a fashion that it was meant to be done, and to really experience it in a way that is honoring, rather than something that has to be hidden, or if we're going to look, oh, that person is too emotional and they're crying too much, or they're too angry, or but they're hurting, they're in pain, they're experiencing where there's may not be an outlet for that person, or that person may not realize that there is an outlet out there for them. And this is something that's talked about in this next book that I've been recommending a lot in recent last year. I found it extremely helpful, and it's been helpful for me in my own healing work. The Smell of Rain on Dust. This is something that was introduced to me by the Shamanic Astrology Mystery School by Daniel Giamario and Knell and some others that talk about this book. It's a powerful dive into the essence of grief, a hallmark of what Chiron can assist us in feeling during a major Chiron initiation. But in general, especially if we have strong Chiron aspects on our chart, then this could be it could do us a world of good and help us heal. So Martin Prechtel is could be loosely called a shaman. He certainly has been a teacher and has played other roles too. He's looked at as a form of that grief and praise are on the same point. And grieving is sharing the loss, could be of someone or something within ourselves, and it's praising that as if that's completed its work with us. Prechtel shows various examples of how that's something we're missing a lot of in modern societies, truly how to grieve and the varying methods to utilize to do it. So I couldn't stress this book enough, really, even more so than the Terrible Love of War, but both of them are really vital to really understand what grieving is and its relationship with nature, its relationship with the earth, the oceans, with the animals. It really opens up a whole new chapter in my view, and how we can connect and giving words to things that I've always felt to some degree here. This is something while I could in later videos talk about, especially when I bring in the element of Chiron. All right, so Chiron Aries. There's going to be another slide after this that I'm going to share about with Chiron Aries. So Chiron Aries, the last time this was happening was in 1969 to 1977. And again, there's transition years where it was transitioning from Pisces to Aries, and then also from Aries to Taurus in those last border years. But now in this case, in 2018, there was the transition from Aries from Pisces into Aries, and then in 2026 to 2027 from the sign of Aries into the sign of Taurus. So healing, Chiron Aries is healing through nobility and purpose. This is something Daniel talks about in his work. Some of what we can, the bullet points here is, for Aries, confrontation, mission and purpose, war and its aftermath, and grieving from loss due to war or related conflicts, but also just to even things that may not necessarily be looked at as war. It could be through all kinds of different missions and things that require a lot of action that might be involving, could even be violence in some level, or even competition or confrontations or debates. There could be certain traumas from that as well, emotional traumas, psychic traumas, and physical traumas that can take place in all of this. So Chiron Aries is for us to bring up those kinds of issues, to be able to grieve, our what is our medicine around this? Well, it's time for all of us to connect into that, meaning that it's to dig deep in ourselves about our relationship to not just the masculine, but to war, but to and mission and purpose, to the aggression, or to the great aggression that is about like overcoming obstacles to keep going forward, progress, and all costs. Some of this can be really powerful and helpful, but then we also have to step back and look at, hey, there's more to it than just, quote, reaching the goal. There's also the aftermath, and it's to connect into that space and go, well, what has been lost? And certainly in here currently in our great turn of the ages and this powerful time in which we're living, a great transition of humanity right now. What happened in 2020 and now in 2021, there is a lot of loss, some terrible, terrible loss, and a lot of shadow that has been unearthed, violence that has been waged, and certainly here in the US, but in other places as well, across the globe, is in the fires, how we manage things, how we make it our mission purpose to try to save things. All of that is all coming up, and this will be for several more years for us to connect into. So it's a great opportunity for us to do more healing work in this area. This could be certainly a much longer video. I know that Caitlin Castell and Daniel Giamario created a whole class about Chiron and Aries, specifically within the Shamanic Astrology Mystery School. And there are other resources I'll probably gather up and then link below that I've tuned into myself about what Chiron and Aries is about. So I'll have those linked below the video as well. There's another piece of research that Greg Knell, he's an astrologer, and he's been studying, I believe he's had other astrological teachings prior to coming into the Shamanic Astrology Mystery School. But he did a lot of research around prior times when Chiron has reemerged, meaning that the US was born at a certain point where Chiron has shown up and has returned back to its place of origin, meaning that when whatever the US Constitution, where the Declaration of Independence was forged in 1776, Chiron is now coming back. We're close to that point now here in the United States. And officially it'll be in 2 years from now, in 2023. And that'll go on for about 1 year and 9 months. So we're kind of at the edge of that return right now. And Greg Knell's research outlined the fractures and wounds experienced by the US and events in the 4 prior Chiron returns in the sign of Aries. Last one took place in 1973 to 75, when Richard Nixon was forced to resign, and at the time of the Vietnam War ending. Certainly a really delicate and fragile time in the United States. Overall themes, Greg Knell identified in the last two Chiron returns, 1923 to 25, and of course 73 to 75. So you can see this happens about every 50 years. This is when Chiron comes back. It's got that every 50-year process, and we're not far from that. Coming into that that time where we're not far for 4 to 5 years here, completing 250 years here in the United States. So the bullet points: institutional efforts to keep wider idealized America strong at the expense of oppressed efforts to suppress more and more ideology viewed as contrary to, quote, American values, takes on extraterritorial scope. So there's a theme about that, and actually we can experience that even right now here, that we're building up into that space. That there's this, I think it's going to reach its, I'd say its maximal amount in the next few years here. Some other outline: puritanical Christian hegemony, influence and control, racial suppression. It's kind of another bullet point that kind of goes back into the first one. We can think of the voting rights issues. We can think of the kind of America that's coming into form. And in fact, at the time of this recording, I just recently read just a brief amount of the results of the 2020 census here in the United States, and that the country is, for the first time, that we've actually had a reduction in the percentage of, quote, white Americans, who are those who identify as white, and a greater percentage of people who don't. And so the great, powerful blending and mixing that America is undergoing, which is, I think, is truly amazing, is coming to a certain form. And there are those that are holding on to some old idealized version of what they thought was the perfect version of America. And they are certainly stuck in some loop of the past that really no longer has its place today. And we're experiencing a lot of the confrontations, a lot of the battles that are going on right now. Presidential scandals. Again, this is pretty typical. There are other factors that play into presidential scandals for sure, and these other points, but Chiron plays a role in this. Big business that changes the nation, the world, ultimately a wielding untold power surfaces once again at this critical time. Excuse me, this is exactly 1923 to 25, we saw Wall Street, really going bonkers in the roaring 20s, and then which years later led to the 1929 crash. And then sort of a recession that took place in the 1970s until it got to the 1980s when Ronald Reagan came into power. So this its research is not sort of been published. It's something that he shared with the Shamanic Astrology Mystery School, but I think it is something that can be accessed through the school. This is something that he may work on to getting it out there on a more more mainstream basis. Then I've got some examples here of Chiron initiations. This is my chart here. This is showing to kind of put a personal touch in this for myself. I'm experiencing a Chiron return. One of the great motivations of why I'm doing this video kind of certainly personally influenced me to express this. So as we have right here, this is the key symbol is glyph is symbolized Chiron. And I've got it down here near the bottom of the chart in the sign of Aries at 9 degrees 39 minutes of Aries. But I've got Chiron worked into some really a really powerful point. My ascendant and descendant in square, as well as opposite Pluto and Uranus, along with this asteroid Juno. So Chiron plays a really powerful role in the expression of myself out in the world. In Shamanic Astrology, we identify the ascendant as our identity project. the dawning of ourself, what we are a learner, what we are a beginner at, what we are learning, as well as relationship intent and the descendant, and then Uranus and Pluto combining to help Chiron express itself, and vice versa. They're all interacting and having a relationship with each other in a sort of an alchemization of the complex itself. So I'll show you here what this looks like. So here, I did this on SolarFire. I use SolarFire, recommend for those who have non-Mac computers, PCs, or laptops. SolarFire can be a great resource. If you don't have it, there is another program available called Time Passages that you can find on astrograph.com. And then there's other astrology software that also does this. So this isn't the only kind. There's plenty others out there, but I use it because I've become familiar with it, and I've had it for about 15 to 16 years here. So here's the whole cycle dynamic from May 29th, 2020 until March 2nd of 2022. So at the time of this recording, looks like I've got about just under 7 months to go in this transit. And everybody gets a Chiron return. It can start as early as 48 and a half. And we can get it as late as our 50 to 51. And typically it ends right somewhere around our either just after our 50th birthday or right around 51 is when that cycle ends. So you can see I've got 3 times it has exact hits. I've already had the first one on April 11th, 2021. The next one's October 26th of this year, and then again in 2022 on February 10th. But in the beginning, I'm going to be sharing with you what it looks like on my chart here. Here is the transiting Chiron right here this is the October 26th. So this is upcoming. This will be about 2.5 months after the recording of this video when this next exact hit takes place. This is when Chiron is retrograde. Now we can see that Chiron, I've got Chiron Aries and connected to the 4th house. So I can, we can connect it to this part of my chart with Uranus and Pluto and my ascendant, descendant. One of the ways that this has expressed, and I've definitely had an identification with the 4th house here. Now I know that other astrologers out there use different house systems, and I believe another house system, I think it shows up in my 5th house, but I've definitely connected with it here in the 4th. So the 4th is all about home and family. It's all about the connection to our roots, similar to the home and roots position, and where we feel at home, how we feel nurtured in the home. And for me, I've felt in most of my life displaced, not fully, truly feeling at home like it was home. Even growing up with my parents, sure, I was home, and to some degree I was protected, but it never really felt like I was in the right place. And almost every place I've lived in, there's been a few times I've come close, like in Portland, Oregon. There have been a few times in a couple of apartments I've lived in that I actually felt fairly solid in that regard. But most cases, not so much. I've since the late 90s, I think I've moved about 20 times, maybe even more in my life, going to different apartments or life changes, relationships, even going to Arizona a couple of times and living down there. So, there's a lot of unsteadiness, a lot of ungroundedness. But back in 2020, in Oregon, we had what we could call sometimes what Daniel calls a sort of the West Coast version of the 9/11 event, meaning that there was a nodal return of 9/11, and for the West Coast, that's where the fires in August and September just completely blew up. And in Oregon, we had some fires going on that weren't like all that big or significant, but on September 8th of 2020, we had this powerful event of a wind event coming through with extremely dry weather, and combined with some opportunists who started fires and power lines being downed. The whole West Coast went up, sort of in smoke, in a sense that we were under weeks of smoke. I had to evacuate myself, and it triggered some powerful wounding and anxiety and trauma in me, with the unsteadiness of where I live, how I live. And I remembered back when I was 14 years old, when I also had an evacuation, and I was living in Los Angeles at the time. And in both of these cases, my place survived, but the fires came close. When I was 14, they came within about 3 homes or so in LA. And then here in Oregon, Southern Oregon, where I'm living now in Medford, I was just living 10 miles away from my current place. And the fire got within about, maybe 50 to 100 feet, depending on which side, on 3 different sides of the fire. And just so happened that neighborhood survived, the little neighborhood that I was living in. I was renting a room, and I had access to a bathroom and another room. And that really, I was having to, stay with friends for a couple of weeks before I could go back to my place after the evacuation. And I know many stories of many people that lost their homes, many who had to evacuate and weren't able to return back. And, it was a really, community-wide event. But for me personally, this definitely was a Chiron return moment. Something where I got to experience something really powerful and profound, and a transformation, feeling another piece, another clue of medicine that I was getting. And this recent year in 2021, and coming into my own apartment here, and really coming to terms, like, what is the nature of home? What does it mean to us? What does it mean to me? So I've been asking that question, connecting with it and feeling into it. It's not so much a process of the intellect, but more of how we feel within on a deeper level, sort of a lower chakra area, maybe from the 1st to 4th chakras. One could say from the root chakra to the 4th chakra, where the heart is. This is where that Chiron is powerfully magnified in Chiron return cycles. So I've had some health issues have come up as well, which can be typical for a Chiron return, or sometimes certain Chiron transits. We can get health issues that can come up during this time. I've certainly had my share this spring of 2021 and into the early summer. But fortunately, I was able to do some, not only to have the conscious self to go and actually work on this, but to realize, like, I had to make some significant changes to what I was doing. And it's been very, very helpful. So I'm really grateful for Chiron. I'm really grateful for the medicine that Chiron is sharing, and how I'm able to be, to move through this journey. So the more stories you can hear about people and uncovering their wounds and healing, the more that a person can help themselves to their own unique challenges and wounds and fracture that can come in this. And I think one of the core wounds, besides the dislodging from unity, which I have, which everyone has, is also to some degree, partly on a spiritual abandonment level, home abandonment, even though physically speaking, that didn't necessarily happen, but on some deeper level in the psyche, there was something inside me around that, and the dislodgement of that space for myself. So, not to belabor this, I want to talk about, there's 2 other charts I want to talk about that are notable people that have had their own Chiron stuff. And this could be, there's so many charts a person can go over as an astrologer that you can find quite a lot in that. Get a lot of good knowledge and wisdom from looking at that. The first one is Judy Garland. She was a well-known figure in the first half of the 20th century into the 60s, 1960s, an actress. And during her passing, it was when Chiron had passed over her natal south node, squaring her ascendant descendant, or was in that process, opposition with her Jupiter. You know, it had just began to enter that process about 2 months before she passed on. And it was supposedly a drug overdose. And there's some confusion about how all that came about. But part of what I'd like to bring in about her Chiron is how important a role it played in her life. Chiron, as you can see here, she was a Cancer rising, but Chiron was square her natal Venus, ascendant, descendant, complexed with Pluto, and in opposition with her natal Jupiter and nodes. So we can see Chiron, she had, I think, a particular medicine wheel about herself that she was able to share with others, but didn't understand how to. And she dealt with a lot of pain and suffering in her life, especially psychologically, she didn't have you might say, the resources to deal with that in her time in that early part of the 20th century there. So in that regard, she was born in 1922, died in 1969, so just after the age of 47. So just after that time, it was, she was, especially because also she was a woman too, she was looked at very differently. And in this time period, she certainly, in the modern 21st century, there would be additional resources at least out there for her to access. And we've certainly come a long way when it comes to help with our on a spiritual level, with our psychological wounding, and that core experience that she's had and has had to dealt with around relationships, around her Vision Quest journey around Libra, and her identity of this Cancer image of being a healer, being a nurturer, being a mother archetype, and what does it mean to keep giving and giving and giving? And she gave quite a lot in her life, but she was relatively strong, and she found strength. I imagine, based on what I've read about her in her life around that, it would be worth a deeper dive astrologically to kind of look at some of these things that have come out and with the archetypal combinations that are there. But I wanted to share that with you because she was beginning a really significant Chiron transit. All right, and the last person we're going to get into here is Paul Newman. This is really interesting. I haven't really looked at either of these people. I wanted to kind of dive into them astrologically speaking to uncover some things, because I hadn't looked at their chart, but I did a kind of a chart search and was looking for things that might be interesting to talk about in this video. And this one I found really interesting as well, along with Judy Garland. There was some other ones that I could certainly bring in maybe at a later time. But Paul Newman was born 1925, and when Chiron and his natal Mars were conjunct in Aries. So he had a nature that was also a bit revolutionary and sort of off the beaten track with his Aquarius sun, but he was also a strong Capricorn rising with a Jupiter, all affected by Chiron and Pluto. So he was somebody that he had a powerful moral compass. He is somebody that really took advantage of his what we call his Chiron medicine, and on a personal level. And to him, in combining it, he had a Pisces moon too that really helped. He was also a philanthropist. He was he did a lot of things that activated his Mars and Aries, including being a car racer, but also a political activist as well. And in fact, I've got a chart here for an event that took place with the March on Washington, the famous March on Washington that Martin Luther King spoke at in Washington, D.C. Well, he was there. And when I looked at it and I read about it, I'm like, oh, wow, okay. So what was, I wanted to know what was going on. So it wasn't just necessarily that that Jupiter was involved in it. There was certainly, he was in a nodal transit. Saturn was sort of loosely a part of this alignment. Saturn square, kind of just past his Saturn square Saturn cycle. But he had Jupiter in Aries that began August 2nd, moved into a degree with his natal Chiron, thereby activating that Chiron complex on his chart with Pluto and the rest of his planets there in Capricorn and Cancer. So it showed up in a big way. Jupiter acts as an expansion agent. And Mars in Aries is willful. It's mission oriented. It wants to fight for something worth fighting for. It wants to go for it. It wants to show up and be counted and take on what needs to be taken on, a cause worth fighting for, to be all in. And he certainly did that. He utilized that on many occasions. In fact, the organizations and his donations that he's done over his life has certainly reflected that. And his, the way he even acted in movies and the portrayals he had, certainly a lot of action movies and things that showed up in a Mars and Aries fashion. But he also had this side to him that understood his own limits, his own boundaries. And meaning that the Chiron, the limits, that the wounding, the discomfort that was there, and he faced it. He was able to face it on many levels through his life. And I see that, I'm saying that he's not necessarily, quote, an ideal person. No, no one really, quote, is, but he is an example of somebody that actually was able to work on himself in that way on a deeper level. And to certainly with the Pisces moon, he had empathy, he had compassion. He was somebody that could really show up and connect with others and realize like, hey, yeah, you've got a big heart there, Paul. We get it. So this allowed him to kind of connect into the world in that fashion. And he was had the kind of that strength and viability about him and the stamina, and that certainly can show up with his all that Capricorn there in his chart, as well as Mars and Aries. So that's something I wanted to share about that. There's certainly other examples, and I certainly welcome anybody's comments about maybe another one to look at for future videos. That would be fun to do. I'm here to help others thrive in their life. That's a big part of what I'm here to do, and to help and heal through the medicine of astrology, shamanic astrology, and all the different things that it can bring into our journey. So thank you very much, everyone, for being a part of this. This is my business, Inspiral Nexus, and I do readings, classes, events, astrocartography. My website is inspiralnexus.com. And of course, as a shamanic astrologer, I was originally taught through Daniel Giamario and his shamanic astrology paradigm. And more information about that can be found at shamanicastrology.com. And feel free to contact me or connect with me on social media. Questions, I always welcome questions. And please like and share this video if it's something you want to share with your friends or family. Be my guest, feel free, because this is something that I really love to do, is to bring this information to you all. So thank you all for everything that you contribute to the world. And I wish you all the best, and to look up into the stars, up into the sky, and connect in. That's where our wisdom, our stories, our knowledge is all contained there, and our relationship to the earth. Something I feel really deeply, and I definitely continue to want to share this with everyone else. So I look forward to next time, and enjoy out there. Thank you.